Okinawa, June 1945. A Japanese soldier crawls out of a cave, hands raised. He's been hiding for 3 weeks. He weighs maybe 90 pounds. His uniform is in tatters. His face is hollow from starvation. American Marines approach cautiously. They expect resistance, a grenade, a final charge, anything. Instead, the soldier collapses. A Marine pulls out a small cardboard box, a K-ration. He opens it and hands the contents to the prisoner. A can of ham and eggs, a chocolate bar, 4 cigarettes, a pack of chewing gum, and toilet paper. The Japanese soldier stares at these items like they're artifacts from another planet. His hands shake as he holds the chocolate. He's never seen anything like it. He thinks it might be poison. The Marine takes a bite first, smiles and hands it back. The soldier tastes it. His eyes widen. For the next 30 minutes, he'll sit there, slowly eating through the ration, crying quietly between bites. This wasn't an isolated incident. It happened thousands of times across the Pacific theater. Japanese soldiers, indoctrinated to believe Americans were weak, decadent, and on the verge of collapse, encountered American food supplies and experienced cognitive dissonance so severe it shattered their entire worldview. This is the story of what happened when the starving soldiers of Imperial Japan met the most logistically dominant military force in human history. It's about chocolate bars that changed minds, cigarettes that revealed lies, and toilet paper that symbolized a gap in industrial capacity so vast it was almost incomprehensible. This is the story of Japanese soldiers who couldn't believe American K-rations. To understand why K-rations shocked Japanese soldiers so profoundly, you need to understand what they'd been eating, or more accurately, what they hadn't been eating. The Imperial Japanese Army had a logistics problem that grew worse with every month of the war. By 1944, the problem had become a catastrophe. By 1945, it was genocide by negligence. A Japanese soldier's official daily ration in 1941 consisted of 850 grams of rice, about 3 cups, 200 grams of meat or fish, when available, vegetables, when available. Tea, that was the plan. Reality was very different. The Japanese military philosophy emphasized fighting spirit over material resources. Yamato Damashi, the Japanese spirit, was supposed to overcome any physical disadvantage. Soldiers were taught that willpower could transcend hunger, that needing food was a sign of weakness, that complaining about starvation was un-Japanese. This wasn't just rhetoric, it was policy. The Japanese supply chain was so inadequate that commanders genuinely expected soldiers to forage, to live off the land, to take supplies from conquered territories. This worked, barely, in China, where Japanese forces could requisition food from Chinese civilians. It failed catastrophically in the Pacific Islands. On Guadalcanal in 1942-43, Japanese soldiers nicknamed the campaign Starvation Island. Official rations stopped arriving after the first month. Soldiers ate grass, tree bark, and roots. The desperate ate snails and insects. The dying ate nothing. Private Kokichi Nishimura, captured on Guadalcanal, described his final weeks before surrender. "We had no food for 11 days. We ate grass. We ate leaves. We ate whatever we could find. Men died quietly in their holes. We were too weak to bury them." By 1944, across the Pacific, Japanese garrisons were systematically starving. On New Guinea, on Bougainville, on bypassed islands throughout the Pacific, thousands of Japanese soldiers were dying not from combat, but from malnutrition and disease caused by malnutrition. On New Guinea alone, of the approximately 140,000 Japanese troops who served there, around 120,000 died. The majority died from starvation and disease, not bullets. Captured Japanese documents reveal the scale of the crisis. A report from the 18th Army in New Guinea, dated January 1945. Daily rice ration, 150 grams per man, 1/5 of normal. Vegetable procurement, impossible. Meat, none. Fish, none. Soldiers are eating grass and tree bark. Strength for combat operations, minimal. Medical records show the progression. Beriberi from vitamin B deficiency, scurvy from vitamin C deficiency, pellagra from niacin deficiency, edema from protein deficiency. Soldiers' bodies were cannibalizing their own muscle tissue to survive. And then came something worse. On isolated garrisons, particularly in New Guinea and the Philippines, Japanese units resorted to cannibalism. Not all units, not most units, but enough that it became documented policy in some cases. Lieutenant General Yoshio Tachibana, commanding on Chichijima, authorized the execution and consumption of captured American airmen. This wasn't survival cannibalism born of desperation, it was ordered by command. Tachibana was later executed for war crimes, but there were other cases driven purely by starvation. Testimony from Japanese survivors describes units where men drew lots to decide who would be killed and eaten. Others describe groups that waited for men to die naturally, then consumed the bodies. This was the reality of the Japanese soldiers' existence by 1944 to 1945. Systematic, institutional starvation, punctuated by disease, isolation, and in the worst cases, the complete breakdown of human norms. And into this nightmare walked American soldiers carrying small cardboard boxes. The K-ration was never meant to be gourmet food. It was emergency sustenance, designed for paratroopers and soldiers in situations where hot meals were impossible. The K stood for Ansel Keys, the physiologist who developed it, not for any quality standard. But compared to what Japanese soldiers had been eating, or not eating, the K-ration was a feast from heaven. Let's look at what was actually inside a K-ration box. Breakfast unit, canned chopped ham and eggs, or veal loaf, 4 crackers, compressed cereal bar, 2 sugar tablets, 3 dextrose tablets, instant coffee powder, 4 cigarettes, chewing gum, toilet paper. Dinner and supper units contained similar items, with variations like cheese, canned meat, lemon powder, and bouillon. The total caloric content was approximately 3,000 calories per day across all 3 meals, enough to sustain a soldier in combat conditions. Now, imagine you're a Japanese soldier who hasn't eaten anything but grass and tree bark for 2 weeks. You weigh 95 pounds. You can barely stand. You've watched 3 of your squad mates die from starvation in the past month, and an American soldier hands you a box that contains real meat in a can, crackers that aren't moldy, coffee sugar, you haven't tasted sugar in months, chocolate, you've never tasted chocolate, cigarettes, better than what your officers smoked, toilet paper, a concept you'd almost forgotten. The psychological impact was devastating to Japanese morale. Sergeant Takeshi Funasaka, captured on Okinawa, described his first K-ration in his post-war memoir. "I thought they were mocking us. I thought this box, this ridiculous abundance, was meant to show how completely they had defeated us. How could a nation losing the war, as our commanders told us America was, give this much food to prisoners?" The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Japanese propaganda had spent years telling soldiers that America was on the brink of collapse, that American fighting spirit was weak, that their industrial capacity was overrated, that they were running out of supplies. And yet, here was evidence to the contrary. Not just enough food, excess, not just necessities, luxuries, chocolate, chewing gum, cigarettes. Private Yasuo Kuwahara, who later wrote a memoir about his experience, recalled the moment a Marine gave him a K-ration after his capture. I didn't understand. We had been told Americans were starving, that their supply lines were broken, that they were desperate. But this soldier pulled out another box for himself and started eating. He had so much food he was giving it away to prisoners. The chocolate was particularly significant. Most Japanese soldiers had never encountered chocolate before. It wasn't part of Japanese food culture, especially not for the working-class men who made up the bulk of the Imperial Army. The concept of sweetened, processed cocoa was foreign. Some thought it was medicine. Others thought it might be poisonous, a test to see if they would eat anything in their desperation. Many refused it initially, but those who tried it experienced something profound: flavor. After months of eating grass, bark, and occasionally rancid rice, the rich sweetness of American chocolate was overwhelming. Some soldiers cried while eating it. Others became angry. Angry at their commanders for lying about American weakness. Angry at themselves for believing the lies. The cigarettes told their own story. Japanese soldiers received tobacco rations, but the quality was poor and supplies were irregular by 1944-45. American cigarettes, Camels, Lucky Strikes, Chesterfields were noticeably better. The tobacco was moister, the flavor stronger, the cigarettes more consistent, and Americans gave them away casually. 4 cigarettes per K-ration, distributed to prisoners without thought. This casual generosity, this ability to give away quality tobacco to enemy soldiers, spoke to a depth of resources that contradicted everything Japanese propaganda had claimed. But perhaps the most psychologically significant item in the K-ration wasn't food at all. It was the toilet paper. To Western audiences, toilet paper is mundane. It's a basic necessity, purchased without thought, expected to be available in any civilized space. To a Japanese soldier in 1945, it was a symbol of industrial capacity beyond comprehension. The Imperial Japanese Army did not issue toilet paper. Soldiers used leaves, grass, or cloth if available. In many cases, especially on isolated islands, they used nothing. Lack of food meant bodily functions had largely ceased anyway, due to starvation. The concept of including toilet paper in a ration kit, of considering it essential enough to manufacture, package, and ship across thousands of miles of ocean, revealed a logistical sophistication that Japanese soldiers had been trained to believe didn't exist. Sergeant Kiyoshi Ogawa, captured on Luzon in early 1945, described his reaction in post-war interviews. "The toilet paper made me understand we had lost. Not the bombs, not the tanks, not the planes. The toilet paper. They had so much production capacity, so many resources, that they could make toilet paper for every soldier and ship it across the Pacific. We couldn't make enough bullets." This realization spread through POW camps like wildfire. Japanese prisoners began comparing notes. They traded stories about the abundance of American supplies, the seemingly infinite quantities of food, ammunition, vehicles, and yes, toilet paper. Each story reinforced the same conclusion. They had been lied to. The chewing gum provoked similar reactions. Chewing gum was included in K-rations partly for its practical benefits. It helped prevent thirst and reduced tension, but mostly because American soldiers liked it. It was a comfort item, a small luxury to make combat more bearable. To Japanese soldiers, it was incomprehensible. This wasn't food. It wasn't medicine. It served no practical military purpose. And yet Americans included it in every ration, manufactured billions of sticks, and shipped it across the world. The message was clear. America had so much industrial capacity that it could afford to manufacture and distribute non-essential comfort items to every single soldier in the field. Corporal Tadashi Suzuki described trying chewing gum for the first time. "I didn't understand what to do with it. The American guards showed me. Chew, but don't swallow. Just chew. For what purpose?" for comfort, he said, for pleasure. I realized then that we never had a chance. An army that gives its soldiers candy for pleasure is an army with unlimited resources. The psychological warfare was unintentional, but devastating. American forces didn't design K-rations to demoralize the enemy. They designed them to feed their own troops. But the contrast between Japanese and American logistics, between starvation and abundance, between bare survival and casual luxury, did more to break Japanese fighting spirit than any propaganda campaign. POW interrogation reports from 1945 are filled with statements like these. We were told America was running out of supplies, but the prisoners eat better than our officers did. We were told American soldiers were weak and undisciplined, but they have so much food they share it with prisoners. We were told Japan's spirit would overcome America's material advantages. But how do you overcome material advantages that include toilet paper and chewing gum for every soldier? The dam of belief had broken. For years, Japanese soldiers had maintained faith despite hardships. They believed in the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, in Japan's divine mission, in ultimate victory. These beliefs sustained them through starvation, disease, and hopeless battles. But the K-ration exposed those beliefs as lies, not through argument or propaganda, but through simple material fact. The abundance contained in one small cardboard box revealed the gap between Japanese and American industrial capacity so clearly that no propaganda could explain it away. Some soldiers broke completely. There are documented cases of Japanese soldiers who, after being given K-rations, began crying uncontrollably and couldn't stop for hours. The psychological shock of realizing they'd been suffering needlessly, that their privation had been caused not by enemy action, but by their own leadership's failures, was too much to process. Others became angry. POW camp commanders reported incidents of prisoners attacking each other or attempting to attack guards, out of rage at having been lied to for so long. But most simply accepted the truth. They had been defeated, not just militarily, but industrially, logistically, economically. The war had been unwinnable from the start, and the evidence sat in a small cardboard box, about 7 inches by 3 inches, weighing less than 2 pounds. Japanese military propaganda in the Pacific War was built on several key narratives. American soldiers were soft, undisciplined, and cowardly. America's industrial capacity was exaggerated. American supply lines were stretched to breaking Japan's fighting spirit, would overcome material disadvantages. Victory was inevitable. The K-ration systematically demolished all 5 narratives. If Americans were soft and undisciplined, why did they create elaborate logistics to ensure every soldier, even in the most remote jungle outpost, received adequate food and even comfort items? If American industrial capacity was exaggerated, how were they producing not just weapons and ammunition, but billions of cigarettes, millions of chocolate bars, and enough toilet paper to supply millions of soldiers across multiple continents? If supply lines were stretched to breaking, why did they function well enough to deliver fresh K-rations to the most forward positions, often faster than Japanese supply lines could deliver rice to troops just a few miles from their bases? If material advantages didn't matter, why were soldiers dying of starvation while their weak enemies ate chocolate? And if victory was inevitable, why did every material indicator point to the opposite? The Japanese command recognized the problem. Internal documents from 1945 show increasing concern about the luxury item problem, the tendency of Japanese soldiers to become demoralized after encountering American supplies. Several memos suggested confiscating American rations from prisoners before other soldiers could see them, or claiming they were poisoned to discourage consumption. But it was too late. The truth was spreading. On Okinawa, American forces began using K-rations as a deliberate psychological weapon. They would leave cases of K-rations near Japanese positions, sometimes with notes in Japanese. This is what American soldiers eat every day. You are starving. Your officers are lying to you. Surrender and eat. The tactic worked. Desertion and surrender rates increased dramatically in the final months of the war, not just because of military defeats, but because Japanese soldiers had lost faith in their own leadership's basic competence. Private Koichi Ito, who deserted on Okinawa in June 1945, explained his decision in post-war testimony. "I was sitting in a hole, eating grass, watching my friends die. An American artillery barrage destroyed a supply point nearby. I crawled over to see if there was rice. There was no rice, but there were hundreds of these boxes, K-rations. I opened one and saw the chocolate, the cigarettes, the crackers. Real food. I realized my officers had been lying. If we were winning, why were we starving while Americans had chocolate? I decided to surrender." His story was not unique. Thousands of Japanese soldiers made similar calculations in the war's final months. The American leaflet campaigns in 1945 increasingly featured images of food. One leaflet showed a K-ration box with text in Japanese. American soldiers carry this every day. Inside, meat, bread, chocolate, coffee, cigarettes. When was the last time you ate meat? Surrender and eat. Another leaflet was even more direct. Your commanders eat while you starve. They have rice while you eat grass. They have sake while you drink dirty water. The Americans will feed you. Choose life. Japanese commanders tried to counter these messages by claiming American food was poisoned or that surrender meant death. But soldiers who had watched their comrades die from starvation were increasingly willing to take that risk. By August 1945, when the war ended, the psychological impact of American logistics, symbolized by the humble K-ration, had contributed significantly to the collapse of Japanese fighting morale. In POW camps after the surrender, one of the most common questions Japanese prisoners asked was, "Do all Americans eat like this?" The answer, that civilian Americans ate even better, was almost incomprehensible to men who had spent years starving. When the war ended in August 1945, the United States held approximately 5,000 Japanese prisoners of war. Most were captured in the war's final months, especially during the battles for Okinawa and the Philippines. Repatriation began in late 1945 and continued through 1946. The assumption was that all prisoners would want to return home immediately. That assumption proved incorrect. A significant minority of Japanese POWs expressed reluctance or outright refusal to return to Japan. The reasons varied, but a common thread ran through many explanations. They had seen the truth about American capacity and Japanese weakness, and they weren't sure they wanted to return to a society built on the lies that had sent them to starve in the jungle. Sergeant Nobuo Fujita, held in a POW camp in Hawaii, told American interrogators in October 1945, "What do I return to? A destroyed country led by men who lied to us, who let us starve while they ate, who sent us to die for nothing. Here, I eat 3 meals a day. I have a bed. I am treated as a human being. In Japan, I will return to poverty and shame." The US military, unprepared for this situation, consulted with Japanese liaison officers. The answer was clear. These men would face severe social stigma in Japan. Soldiers were expected to die rather than surrender. Those who survived as prisoners would be viewed as cowards or traitors, regardless of the circumstances of their capture. Many prisoners had adopted American habits during captivity. They smoked American cigarettes, ate American food, and some had even learned English. These cultural adaptations would mark them as contaminated by enemy influence. In some cases, prisoners expressed desire to emigrate to the United States or other countries rather than return to Japan. American immigration law at the time made this nearly impossible. Japanese immigration was severely restricted, and former enemy soldiers were categorically excluded. A few managed to stay longer by volunteering for labor programs. The U.S. military needed workers for reconstruction efforts in the Pacific, and some POWs were allowed to remain as civilian employees for several months, beyond the official repatriation deadline. But most eventually returned to Japan, carrying with them knowledge that would shape post-war Japanese society in unexpected ways. In the immediate post-war period, returned POWs faced exactly the stigma they'd feared. Families sometimes refused to acknowledge them, communities shunned them, employment was difficult to find. But these men also carried back stories of American abundance and efficiency. They described the K-rations, the logistics, the casual waste of a military so well supplied it could give away food and cigarettes to prisoners. These stories contributed to a growing understanding among ordinary Japanese of why the war had been lost. It wasn't divine will or superior American fighting spirit. It was industrial capacity, economic strength, and logistical sophistication. This understanding would shape Japan's post-war development. If Japan wanted to avoid future subjugation, it needed to match American industrial capacity. The path forward wasn't military expansion, it was economic development. The K-ration became, in an odd way, a symbol of this realization. In post-war Japanese popular culture, references to American food abundance appear repeatedly. Memoirs by veterans often include detailed descriptions of the first time they encountered a K-ration. Some describe it with bitterness, others with dark humor, but all acknowledge its symbolic significance. One veteran, writing in the 1960s, reflected, "The K-ration taught me more about America than 100 battles. It showed me that we were not fighting an army, we were fighting a factory, and the factory was winning." By the 1950s, as Japan began its economic recovery, some of that same industrial philosophy that produced K-rations in such abundance influenced Japanese manufacturing. The emphasis on efficiency, standardization, and reliable distribution that characterized American wartime logistics became a model for Japanese industry. The irony was not lost on some observers. The K-ration that demoralized Japanese soldiers in 1945 became, indirectly, a lesson in the industrial methods that would make Japan an economic powerhouse by the 1970s. On June 30th, 1945, the last K-ration rolled off the production line. The war in Europe was over. The war in the Pacific was ending. The military was transitioning to a new ration, the C-ration, that would incorporate lessons learned from the K-ration experience. By the time production ceased, American industry had manufactured over 105 million K-rations. Each box represented a small piece of the industrial capacity that had won the war. But for Japanese soldiers who encountered them in the jungles and caves of the Pacific, K-rations meant something more profound than mere logistics. They were proof, tangible, undeniable proof, that everything they'd been told was a lie. The chocolate revealed that America wasn't on the brink of starvation. The cigarettes showed that American supply lines weren't broken. The toilet paper demonstrated that American industrial capacity wasn't just adequate, it was excessive, abundant to the point of including luxuries. And all of it, every chocolate bar, every cigarette, every square of toilet paper, was being delivered to soldiers thousands of miles from home, across oceans, through submarine-infested waters, to remote islands where Japanese soldiers were dying from lack of basic supplies. The message was clear. Japan never had a chance. This realization didn't come from propaganda or battlefield defeats, or even from the atomic bombs. It came from a cardboard box, 7 inches long, 3 inches wide, weighing less than 2 pounds. In the decades since, Historians have studied the logistics of World War II exhaustively. They've analyzed shipping capacities, production figures, supply chain efficiency. They've concluded unanimously that American industrial and logistical superiority was one of the war's deciding factors. But for the Japanese soldiers who lived through it, who starved in the jungles while Americans ate chocolate, the lesson didn't require historical analysis. It was visceral, immediate, undeniable. The K-ration wasn't just food. It was a weapon, more effective in its way than any bomb or bullet, because it didn't just kill the enemy. It destroyed the will to fight. And sometimes, in war, that's more important than victory on the battlefield. Today, K-rations are collector's items. Unopened boxes sell for hundreds of dollars. Military history enthusiasts debate the merits of different meal variations. Food historians analyze their nutritional content and cultural impact. But for the Japanese soldiers who first encountered them in 1945, starving and defeated on remote Pacific islands, K-rations represented something simpler and more profound. They were proof that the war was over. Japan had lost, and the evidence fit in a small cardboard box